Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. Welcome to the first online Fintech Drinks. We're happy to have you here with us this evening. We just started a bit early and we see some people are already coming in, so thank you for being on time. We're actually just going to get started in 2 minutes. But before we get started, we just want to run you through the functionalities of Hopin, which is a platform we're using first time for Fintech Drinks. So you'll see on this side of the screen, there's the chat functionality. So let's just make sure you hear me properly. You should see event and stage. If you click on stage, that's going to be the main chat for this stage area. Just type yes if you do hear me loud and clear. I would appreciate that. Donc, pour ceux qui viennent juste d'arriver, à gauche ici, on a la fonctionnalité de clavardage. Si vous m'entendez bien, juste écrivez oui comme ça, qu'on sait que la plateforme fonctionne et que tout le monde est ici avec nous. I see Neil said yes. Great, thank you, Neil. Perfect. So once again, if you're just tuning in, right here we have the chat functionality. Should be pointing on the right side of the screen. You should see stage, so that's where we're going to be chatting this evening. We'd also love for you to introduce yourselves. So let us know where you're tuning in from, your name and where you work and why you're here tonight. That way you can do some online networking before we start. You'll see on this side of the screen, there's also sessions and networking. So like a real Fintech Drinks, you'll have the opportunity to meet each other later, but we could already get the ball started. So on that side of the screen, you just let us know who you are and where you're listening from. Don't see any messages coming up yet. I see there's some in the event and a few in the stage. There might be a slight delay between my video and what you hear, which is normal, but appreciate a sign of life in the chat, just so I know that I'm coming in loud and clear. Okay, Wendy. Hey, Wendy from CRTA, great. Okay, now some messages are coming in on my side. Hélène, hello, nice to see you. Spencer from Toronto, awesome. Perfect. Well, I'm seeing the time, 5:31. Chat works. You hear me loud and clear. Awesome. So we'll kick it off officially. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first online edition of Fintech Drinks. We're super happy to have you here with us this evening, even though it's not in person. It's been a while since we had the last Fintech Drinks back in February before this all started. So it's awesome to kick it back up. We had a huge demand for tonight's event, so we're excited. People are going to be coming in more and more as the show gets going. But thank you for all being here. If you missed my message earlier, on this side, there's the chat where you could introduce yourselves, and we'll get into more networking later. And I'll give you all the ins and outs of the platform. For those who don't know me, my name is Nicholas Bellavo. I'm the head of marketing at Fintech Cadence, and I'll be having the pleasure of being your host this evening. Tonight, we're all here for the first online edition, where we'll be speaking about cybersecurity, lockdown, how cybersecurity has to step up. And this edition and future online editions of Fintech Drinks are sponsored by EY and Expertis. So we're very happy to have these two organizations supporting this new edition of Fintech Drinks. And just before we get going, to share a few words, I'd like to invite Jason Green from EY to share about EY. Jason.
Thank you so much, Nick, and hello, everyone. We at EY are actually thrilled to be involved with this series of events. We're really looking forward to some interesting discussions and are truly grateful for the opportunity to be a sponsor, so thank you. At EY, we've been involved in fintech for some time. We've been applying our experience to entities who design, operate, and consume relevant solutions and services in many industries. We've seen fantastic innovation taking place and the positive impacts of achieving the seemingly impossible, at least in the early days. That entrepreneurial spirit has just driven a massive industry of maturity, which is truly amazing. From mobile banking and cryptocurrency to insurance and investment technology, the maturity is evident. And the socioeconomic benefits derived from the diversity of fintech products in or entering the marketplace are apparent and ever increasing. We're just loving what everyone is doing. As one of the largest professional services firms globally, EY is going to continue to contribute on both the technology and business operations side by investing in research, hiring, making available top talent who can support explosive growth, and both share and apply our diverse experience and learnings in many ways. We look forward to doing that for years to come and collaborating with you all. As today I'm actually participating in the panel itself, I'd like to keep this short and end by again thanking you for your participation and Fintech Cadence for inviting us to collaborate. Many thanks again, and Nick, back to you.
Thanks, Jason. We're super happy to have you. As you mentioned, you will see him again and hear his lovely voice a bit later, since he is indeed one of the panelists as well this evening. Thanks, Jason. So for those who don't know about Fintech Cadence, before I get into that, actually, who's here for the first time for a Fintech Drinks event? You could let me know in the chat here. I see more and more coming in. So one, you could introduce yourselves on the left side in the stage area. And if you're here for the first time, just say yes. Let us know if it's your first Fintech Drinks. I'm curious. Because if it is your first time, it's probably the first time you're hearing about Fintech Cadence. And I have the pleasure of running you through a bit about what we do. So our mission at Fintech Cadence is to develop future Fintech leaders. Concretely, we do that through our 3 pillars. So we have education, support, and collaboration. So that's a bit broad, but to make it more specific, we have programs and events to, well, fulfill those goals. The certificate focuses on the education pillar, which is a program that really teaches you the ABCs of FinTech. We have the Ascension program, which is an incubation program for early stage FinTech startups. The next cohort starts next January. Applications are already open. You could check out all the details on our website. And lastly, the Formathon, which is Canada's biggest open innovation competition in FinTech. The last cohort just ended this last May, so you could find all the details for the next edition as well on our website. We also run events throughout the year to really engage the community, and the one, well, we're most excited about today is obviously Fintech Drinks. We also have the Fintech Career Fair, which we had a phenomenal last edition last January, as well as University Series, where we go around different universities throughout Canada to teach students about financial technology. All right, so this evening, we will kick off the panel in just a few minutes. It'll be followed by a Q&A, so if you have questions throughout the evening, feel free to write them in the chat. The panelists will be able to see the chat throughout the conversation, but we'll really focus on answering them at the end of the presentation within the designated time. We have 15 minutes for questions, and then we will end with sessions and networking. So you'll see on this side of the screen, we have sessions and networking. So we have 3 sessions planned for you that I'll explain a bit later, as well as networking, where you have 5 minutes to meet one-on-one with the different people. So that's why already you could introduce yourselves. Vous pouvez vous introduire dans le clavardage de ce bar-là. Comme ça, on peut savoir qui est ici avec nous ce soir. And you could also check out people. So you'll see chat, polls, and people. Within people, you could go and see actually who's here. If they entered their LinkedIn, you could also check them out, connect with each other. That's the whole point of Fintech Drinks, to make new connections, to meet the FinTech community, which is now, well, all across Canada since we're able to do this online. All right, so I mentioned how to use Hopin. I've been doing it, but I'm seeing the numbers are up from where we were originally. So I'll just do another quick run through. You have the chat on this side, and then sessions and networking, which I'll explain a bit later. So at the end of the presentation, you'll click here for sessions, here for networking. But right now, stay with us on this stage area. And the main chat we'll be using is the stage chat while we're here. If you have any general questions afterwards, you could use the event chat. I hope that's clear for everybody. Probably most of you are using Hopin for the most of you are using Hopin for the first time. Maybe some are experienced Hopin users, hoppers. I don't know how to call that. All right, let's keep moving on. So tonight, well, this is our panel. We have the pleasure of having 3 phenomenal speakers, one of our biggest lineups yet. And I'll read you through their bios so you have an idea of who we have here with us this evening. First off, we have Mathieu Lavoie. He's the co-founder and CEO of Flare Systems. Mathieu has been around cybersecurity even before he obtained his engineering degree from ETS. He managed the offensive security team in a large financial institution for 3 years and was also strategic advisor for senior executives regarding cybersecurity and blockchain. He spoke at security conferences such as HOPE, Hackfest, and NorthSec about his open source Bitcoin forensic tool called BitCluster. Next up, well, we have the man you saw just earlier, Jason Green, partner in cybersecurity at EY, where he spends his time focusing on the financial services industry. He advises clients, boards, and leadership teams on security, privacy, and overall risk strategy, innovation, and transformation, while also addressing tactical operational technology issues and helping organizations through challenging incidents. He has worked with clients to minimize risk and increase efficiencies in a career that spans over 30 years. Lastly, but not the least, we have Joseph Lowe. He's the Chief Information Security Officer at Portage Ventures. Joseph joins Portage from the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, where he was head of critical infrastructure partnerships and managed a team of cybersecurity advisors who supported the finance, telecommunications, energy, transportation, and health sectors. Prior to this, Joseph did a stint at Doha, Qatar with Global Risk Advisors, where he had the Director of Cybersecurity. His previous experience also includes a long history of public service as part of Canada's Communications Security Establishment, where he spent 15 years in progressive roles at the intersection of technology and national security. Joseph holds a Bachelor of Computer Science from the University of Manitoba and a Master of Business Administration from Queen's University. Thank you to the three of you for being with us this evening. Super excited, and we're going to kick it off, but first I need to introduce, obviously, your moderator this evening. I'd like to welcome to the stage the Executive Director of Fintech Cadence, Layal El-Hadi.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Nick.
Hey, Layal, how's it going?
Oh, it's going well. How are you doing?
Good. It feels better talking with somebody on a hop-in event versus just by myself and trying to imagine people listening to me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
It's crazy that we're doing our event today because I don't know for the people listening, if you saw, there was just some big news that was announced, crypto scam on Twitter. So
yeah,
thousands of dollars. Well, maybe Lyle, you want to run through what we heard just earlier, and it's still a developing story, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it's very fortuitous for us. We know cybersecurity has been a big element of fintech over the last few years. I think it goes without saying with what's happening in COVID and everyone moving towards working digitally, it's become quite key. But what is fortuitous for us today is, as we're seeing it happen live, is what's going on with Twitter. So for those of you who don't know, from our understanding, there's been a scam online where they've taken accounts over significant people, Elon Musk, for example, Apple, and they've asked people to take that they will donate money on their behalf if they give them their cryptocurrency value. And so now I think we just checked before we started the event, there has been about $50,000 stolen, and they're still trying to mediate it. So it's very interesting to see how these processes are going through, but also the relevance of why cybersecurity more than ever. I mean, we'll definitely talk with the panelists to see, but why it's key for us to always keep our eye out on it as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, I'll tune out. I'll give you the stage, Layal, and we're looking forward to hearing this great panel.
Yes, as am I. Perfect. Thank you very much, Nick. Yes, and like Nick said, we're very, very excited to have the panelists here today. I'm going to bring them on very shortly. But first, we just kind of wanted to give you the explanation of why cybersecurity, why today, why our first Fintech Drinks. So as we just mentioned, we talked about the fact that with COVID, most work is going remote, most elements and most products and services going digital. It's become quite important for lots of companies, whether incumbents or fintechs, to start being aware and start really testing their cybersecurity processes. But more importantly, it's important, and this is something the panelists will bring up, it's important for us to understand, well, really what is cybersecurity and move away from the buzzword, but really try and understand how is it being implemented, how can people work together, what does it look like now when our borders no longer are as significant as they were before. We can operate from any area. How does this impact regulations? How do regulations play a part? But most importantly is how can fintechs help speed up cybersecurity for incumbents? And how can they make sure that they're integrating and implementing cybersecurity internally as they're building their companies? So these are all key elements that we're going to be talking about today. And we're also going to be talking about the technology versus the people. So when we talk about cybersecurity, when we talk about privacy, when we talk about security in general, what are we talking about specifically, and how does that differ from technological products that we refer to versus internal processes, reviews, and practices that we have. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up the panel, and I'm going to invite the panelists to join me right now on the stage. So Jason, Joseph, and Mathieu, please come on. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Yes, welcome. Glad to have you guys here with us today, as mentioned. I'm very excited to hear your thoughts. We've had lots of conversations about this, so I'm excited for the audience as well to be able to hear about what's happening in cybersecurity, but also the processes and the strategies behind it. But maybe I'll just give you guys, as we start off and warm up, give you guys a chance to quickly introduce yourselves. Jason, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks so much. As Nick had said, I'm Jason Green. I've been doing this for several decades now, spending a lot of time focusing on cyber as a concept. And prior to that, if we go back to the 80s when I started, I think it was IT security and information security. And having watched it evolve and become this pervasive behemoth of interesting things that we all have to do to protect ourselves over the last few decades, I feel privileged to be able to come and talk to people like yourself, this great audience and these great panelists, to share what I've learned and to learn more myself. But ultimately, a 30-year cybersecurity person, enjoying what I do very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jason. Mathieu, I'll go over to you.
Hi. Well, thanks for having me tonight. As was been said during the introduction, I'm from a technical background, but I like really the part of translating the technical information to the business part. Likely, I'm acting more as a business person for Flair as a CEO instead of a technical person, but I still like to stay close to my technical root and follow up what are the new things that are coming up in terms of cybersecurity, fraud prevention, and fintech industry.
Amazing. Thank you, Mathieu. And Joseph, we'll go over to you.
So thanks again for having me here. So my name is Joseph Lau. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Portage. So I spent almost 19 years in government doing both offensive and defensive cybersecurity, and working with critical infrastructure in terms of helping them get better at cyber. I guess most recently, last November, I switched over to work with Portage Ventures, which is a venture capital firm, and it's been a really great experience. I guess in terms of my daily duties, I actually have three of them. The first one is obviously to be the CISO for Sagard and Portage, but then the other one is to be a part of the investment team, and I get to see some of the do some of the due diligence for new investments. And the third one is actually my favorite part of my job is working directly with some of our fintechs, our portfolio companies, in terms of helping them improve cyber. So we have at any one time, let's say, 20 to 40 investments. So there's a lot of people to talk to and a lot of people to help.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joseph. And what's really great is we have a lot of different stakeholders represented here today, from fintechs to VCs to larger organizations. So I'm sure, and of course, Joseph, with your experience in government, will have all those different perspectives. Just a small reminder to our audience, we welcome questions. So please feel free to write any questions that you have on the chat, and we'll be coming to them with the Q&A. But let's start off by understanding and building the context for how we're going to be, for the elements that we're going to be discussing. When we talk about cybersecurity, it's often used as either a buzzword or an overarching term, but there's many different ways that we can perceive it, and we've seen it just from our conversations amongst ourselves. From your perspectives, what are the different components that make up cybersecurity and the things for people to keep in mind when discussing cybersecurity? And maybe we'll go in reverse. Mathieu, you look to answer, so we'll start with you.
Sure, I can start. And I think feel free to jump in as I speak, because when I start, I can use the 25 minutes to talk about this broad question, because it is a really complex question and a big question. Usually in cybersecurity, we think about like cybersecurity not only in IT perspective, but as a process and as people. And one really important thing during this current situation is people is really core to your security, and you need to rely on them. So having kind of an approach that addresses the process, and it needs to start from the top. Like, it needs to have a business willingness to be secure and to push that forward as a differentiator, or even as something that is important, like a company, a value for the company. And when you start doing so, this is really when you can have to start having what we call a cybersecurity culture. Otherwise, you're just initiative here and there, and they're not linked together. If people don't think it's important, if they don't know why they do so, it's just another burden for them. Like if you just tell people to do that and that without explaining why they do so, it's just another burden that block them for being efficient. Instead of, they don't see the value in how it could be secure. And understand me correctly, cybersecurity shouldn't be a blocker of efficiency. I think it's a way that you can use cybersecurity to be aligned with the business goal. And cybersecurity is a negotiation and a risk modeling. So you need to understand what are the real risk and the most important one, prioritize them, and see what are the real no-no for cybersecurity and what is negotiable, and how we can actually help and enable the people that have a job to do it in a more secure way. So it's always improvement.
Absolutely, and we'll be getting into that a bit more in terms of seeing who are the people responsible and why it's been important for the whole company to take on the cybersecurity aspect of it as well, and touching on the culture. So thank you for that, Mathieu. Jason and Joseph, I'll see if there's anything you want to add to that in terms of cybersecurity as a term and understanding the components of it.
Sure, I'm happy to go if you like. I mean, from sort of my and our perspective, we look at it in the simplest terms possible. I think we treat it as a blend of technology and process methods and techniques, all working in unison to combat digital threats or protect digital assets and artifacts. And ultimately, in the simplest way we can define it, it should result in well-informed and trained people following well-developed processes, using well-implemented technology. That's how we pretty much look at cybersecurity as a whole.
Perfect, very clear cut there. Thank you. And Jason, any last comments from, Joseph, any last comments from your side?
Maybe I'll just simplify it even further. From a fintech perspective, I would say that cybersecurity is really concerned with two different things. The first one would be fraud, people stealing money. And then secondly, it would be information theft, right? So how do you protect the information of your company, your intellectual property, and also client information? So from a very, very broad 10,000-foot view, I would say when you're talking about cybersecurity to non-technical people, it's really about preventing money from being stolen or information from being stolen.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Yeah, thank you for that. And I think it helps put, like I said, the context of what we're going to be really diving into deeply here. Now, I think it goes without saying we're all experiencing over the last few months quite difficult challenges with what's been going on with COVID. I think cybersecurity has come to light again in terms of wave or trends of what's happening. But from what we've seen with COVID, I mean, there's been lots of elements that it's changed in our lives. But with cybersecurity and privacy, especially, well, one, as people work from home, as people move their products as well online and digitally, what are some of the most significant changes, if any, that you've seen when it comes to the implementation of cybersecurity or the awareness of cybersecurity right now within companies? And maybe, Jason, I'll start with you since we put Mathieu on the floor right away last time.
Sure. Happy to. I think COVID introduced a number of really complex challenges for the consumers and the users themselves, and more importantly, the businesses who are trying to deliver the services and leverage their own staff. If we look at it in a very fundamental way, they were impacted. Companies were impacted by supply chain because that supply chain itself was having impacts because their people were no longer available. There was lots of rapid deployment of technology to allow people to work remotely and still collaborate and be very productive. But the rapidity of that deployment meant that there were occasionally shortcuts around policy. There may not have been the right level of protection to the assets that were being given to the users. And that, for the companies affected themselves and also everyone in the supply chain, meant that security became a little bit more challenging. It also opened up the opportunities for the threat actors, the common vernacular for bad guys in the cyber world. It opened the opportunity for them to exploit the fact that people were working from home. They would sending emails, sending phishing attacks, sending ransomware, claiming to be IT support from the company. And so Not only was it very complex for individuals and companies to handle, it resulted in greater levels of threat being realized as time progressed. And it took a little while for people to catch up. I think now we're all in a good space, but those are the primary challenges that we were hearing about from our clients.
Mm-hmm. And if I can just touch on that a little bit, Jason, dive a bit deeper. You mentioned that now you think we're in a better place. Is it because the wave has kind of gone, the shock has gone through, and now we're adapted, and IT kind of has caught up, and companies have caught up? Do you feel that it might change or alter, or do you feel like we're in the right, like you were saying, the right space?
I think we may all agree that this, to some degree, is the new norm. But if we consider sort of the first month or two of this situation, everybody was playing catch up. Everybody was trying to be very progressive. They were trying to be enabled and still work. IT technology teams, security teams were having trouble keeping up with that to some degree. Now they've had time to catch up. Now a majority of users are operating from home. Supply chain companies have also sorted their issues out as well. So if I look at our own firm, a vast global firm, we basically turned the lights off on nearly everyone who worked at the firm overnight. And it took a while, of course, even with our experienced security teams, to have everybody working securely from home. But now it's the norm. New processes were developed, different technology was introduced, and generally we're safe. And I think that's a common theme we're hearing from multiple industries.
Right. Okay, perfect. Joseph, I'll go over to you if there's anything you want to add as well.
I guess I can maybe speak from the attacker's perspective or the hacker's perspective. What we've seen is, unfortunately, like unprecedented job losses very quickly. And perhaps there's people that are part-time fraudsters. One way to look at it is they lost their job. They're very desperate, and maybe their CERB payment hasn't come through, and they're just trying to make money. So I know that particularly within fintechs, the security teams aren't quite as large as, let's say, some of the big 6 banks. So in that context, we've actually seen quite a large volume and spikes of things like credential stuffing attacks and so forth. So I would say that one of the outcomes of COVID from a cybersecurity perspective is there's a lot more activity than you would maybe see during the lull during summertime. So it's an unfortunate situation, but I think there's quite a few desperate people that might not do this normally.
Right. So
and that have lost.
Absolutely, it creates that. I don't want to say incentive in a positive way, but it creates that desperation, like you were mentioning, Joseph. Absolutely. And Mathieu, from your perspective?
Well, actually, I can continue on Joseph's thought. Like in a fraud perspective, usually what we've seen is fraudsters usually have a day-to-day job because we see an increase of spike into illicit market during the weekend and during the night. So it's kind of a normal that like when it's sidelined and you have more time, it's something that you can invest. And definitely, I'll say that it shifts a little bit. I think in certain situations, cyber criminals they are looking for something that is new, urgent sentiment, as well as curiosity. It's 3 themes where they usually create attacks on, and there was all of 3. Like all 3 was there, and we see a shift. Like through there was a lot of. I think it passed through some news, and we saw an increase of fraudulent activities related to CERB government help, and the reason why is the help needs to go fast. It needs to go out soon, and it was kind of the minimal to do. The MVP needs to go ASAP outside, so the money needs to flow. So for sure, there was some cybersecurity trade-off that was made there, and I think it was a similar situation for the enterprise. Enterprise just shut out their office right away during the night, and IT needs to carry on, and cybersecurity, the guideline not necessarily fit anymore. And it was kind of for the next 2 months, figure it out, try to be secure on your own. And most of the 99% wants to be secure, wants to help the company. They don't want to harm the company, but they did their best, and they wasn't sure which way to go because the paths or the direction wasn't really clear. So it could. And when we see some cybersecurity issue because of COVID, we always keep in mind that it wasn't necessarily to a malicious intent for employees. It was just that they didn't know and thought they were doing good, and they used that tool because it seems to be okay tools and it seems to work and it seems to be efficient, but they didn't know the cybersecurity implication that could be that could use and that could bring with that tools, as well as like now the computer, the business computer, or at everyone's house. It could be used for other purposes in business. So it kind of shifts as well this kind of reality where it's important in this current situation to try to keep as much separation between the business and the personal part. So even if you have your business computer at home, even if you can have access to your personal email, try to keep that line straight. Like, don't try to go one way or the other. It's not. I'm not saying that it will cause an incident, but it's not a good practice. It's not a good cybersecurity hygiene to adapt in that sense. So it's still a new reality that we need to adapt. And we're not even talking about the privacy issue. There's a lot of things that we can talk about privacy issue. So I don't want to take too much time, but it's bring out a new way and a new subject on like, what is the new privacy when you're working from home?
Right. Absolutely. And definitely something that you hear a lot about now that's happening, which is just by default. Maybe before we move on to another area, I am curious, and Mathieu, you kind of worded it in the right ways, that everyone has the right intention, or most people. I'll use your stat, 99.9%. I believe that's think of the right stat.
Probably accurate, yeah.
Hopefully. Hopefully, exactly. Have the right intention. But I am curious, from all of your perspectives, do you believe that there is a right way to, right now with what's happened with COVID and moving digitally, is there a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it? Or is there ways that companies, we have a lot of fintechs who are on the call right now, companies, enterprises, who are also looking at their own internal processes. Is there a right way for them to prepare their companies and their processes? And is there a wrong way to do it?
There's definitely a wrong way of going too fast and try to move it. Like, you need to stay calm and analyze what is the current situation. I would say it's a good opportunity to make some change. I think there was a lot of companies saying, hey, it's not feasible to do remote working circularly in a safe way. You need to come at the office, and well, at a certain point, change your reality drastically. I think there is a way to, like, historically, we kind of designed cybersecurity like kind of a castle, like with the inside and the outside, and what we call the perimeter. So bad guys are outside, good guys are inside. And like, even though we see that through recent events is not necessarily the case, and you cannot trust a company of like hundreds of thousands of people, that's not feasible. It's not because they signed the code of conduct that it will respect them and that they will respect it. So there is kind of a new way of setting the perimeter. It's a way to there's a lot of cryptography certificates, authentication method, 2FA, strong authentication mechanism that needs to be put in place, and they should be that define who's an employee, who is not. When you have a strong authentication and have something you have on your laptop, usually it's a certificate that is installed on your laptop plus something, a password, a strong authentication mechanism. Well, it should be the way it's being designed. Like, if we look at the Google has been doing that for a while with their, I think it's called Beyond Corp, the kind of a structure they have in place. The perimeter is the right time to shut it down, even though we know it's not real for a while. Like, it's always one email opening from the outside, from the inside. So even if you have like a strong wall, you're just at one email click to compromise that. But right now, it's kind of a good time to rethink this architecture of having more like segmented or software-defined network, or those kind of technology that could be used to define right access right.
Absolutely. Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to do a quick touch point for our audience here. We have about half the time left for our panel. So if you guys do have any questions, please make sure to keep putting them in the chat. We're seeing some of them coming in, and we do thank you. For our panelists, I'm going to move into a little bit of a different direction out of the context of COVID and focus a little bit more in general regarding the financial sector here in Canada. Now, I mean, it's quite a misleading question what I'm about to ask you, but I am curious from your perspective, in Canada, when it does come to cybersecurity, we're talking a lot about digital identity in the future. We're talking a lot about open banking. We're talking a lot about legacy systems versus new systems. But from your perspective, what do you believe the financial Canadian sector is doing right? Are we going in the right speed? Are we having the right conversations? And are we collaborating in the right way with the different stakeholders? And Joseph, I'll start with you on this one.
Okay, so what is Canadian financial sector doing well? I would say that we are moving towards digital ID, and in fact, Portage/Sagard has recently funded the Digital ID Lab that's based in Gatineau. So I think we're moving towards that type of culture. I think in terms of what we're doing not so great in Canada is information sharing. So for various reasons, financial institutions are very reluctant to admit when they get compromised, or they'll share that in very small circles. So one of the organizations I work with is called FSISAC, and it's the large financial sector information sharing. And to this point, they actually haven't had fintechs involved in that organization. So we're working very hard to include ourselves in that discussion. As you know, the banking sector is very interconnected. So a compromise with a fintech that is affiliated with one of the larger FIs, that has ripple effects across. So I would hope that cybersecurity isn't something that in Canada we compete on. I think that's something that we should work together on a lot more. So I'd say that would be probably the largest weakness that I've seen.
Perfect, thank you, Joseph. And we're definitely going to get into the relationship between fintechs and financial sector as well. Jason, I'll move on to you from your perspective on the Canadian security.
Sure. What we're seeing in the financial sector, and we work with a lot of the incumbents as well as the fintechs, we're seeing strides being made, which is the good thing, to tackle cybersecurity in manageable chunks, to look to evolve the processes in small ways and change the way the culture inside of the environments, inside of the companies, to mean that everyone has a responsibility, but nobody has a great weight of responsibility. So we're seeing security embedded into DevOps, we're seeing security embedded into all of the common business processes in manageable ways. And I think we do that right. I also think, the regulators that oversee the Canadian financial services space are putting forward meaningful cybersecurity goals, things that are actually achievable. And to Joseph's point, I think it was only maybe 2 years ago where we introduced, as part of our privacy laws, PIPEDA, we introduced mandatory breach reporting, which is becoming effective. There are more and more reports coming out. So should you be an organization that gets breached and potentially have a loss of personally identifiable information, you have to report it to the Privacy Commissioner at that point. And I think that action, that activity itself has caused people, companies, entities to take cyber seriously. So I think we're moving at the right speed, although we are a little bit behind, our southern cousins, for example, and we're not quite as rapid in some ways or as heavily investing as some of the more progressive European countries. We're being cautious, but as a society, we're very conscious of privacy. We care about that, and we want to do it the right way. So we're seeing good things.
Yeah, and I think you summed up the perfect culture of Canada, right? We've seen that with our regulations, we see that with our security, we see that there. And definitely thanks to comment on that, in terms of the caution versus the needing to improve there. Mathieu, I'll give you a chance as well, especially as a startup that's been working in this sector for a while. From your perspective, how have you seen it?
Well, I totally agree on Joseph's point. I think collaboration is the key. It's something that it's working, but it's human collaboration. So someone sends something to someone else that he trusts, and it needs to be more like automatic system of put everyone information together, or like fraudulent information or knowledge of the different banks together. There's definitely legal and privacy issue there. It's concerned. It needs to be done in a way it's respectful from the people, personal level information. but as well as I think we have some fraud initiative where they share information, and there's definitely a play there and a big opportunity there. But also on the anti-money laundering, if you're comparing to other countries, sometimes we're a bit behind. I think it's coming up to speed. I think there's a willingness of the government to twist that knob a little bit on terms of AML, and the KYC will become really, really important. The AML will be way more than just looking at lists and do kind of the minimal thing. It needs to go and consume different stream of data and different data sources to correlate those together to really have a clear view on like who's doing what, like who is who on the internet and on the illicit network, and try to really pinpoint, say, okay, do I want this person money or not?
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And Jason, I believe you mentioned the Europeans and maybe the United States as well. From all of the panelists here, are there other countries we should be looking at, or other examples that we should be looking at in terms of speed, process, the way they became more secure as a nation, if possible, as well?
I think from my side, just to follow up and finalize on that comment, the common folks that we are compared against and we try and measure ourselves against, rightly so for a variety of reasons, is the US, typically the UK, and then Australia. We have similar socioeconomic environments. We have similar risk tolerances as a people. And I think these are the ones where we typically, actually have a look at and go, how are we doing there? Now, when we go into some of the Far Eastern countries, their progression is rafts ahead of anyone else. And I think for Canada, that level of rapid progression to try and achieve that might be detrimental. So staying in line with common socioeconomic cultures like ours, I think makes the most sense.
Joseph, Mathieu, any other countries you guys want to throw in there?
I'll say one more thing about Canada. From a government perspective, I think be very careful what you wish for when you want to enforce regulations. If you want to enforce mandatory reporting requirements, because that's actually a race to the bottom. So people are going to only share the bare minimum. I think it's something that we have to foster in terms of that culture of sharing and not shaming the people. And that's why I strongly believe that this cybersecurity shouldn't be something that we compete on. And I know it is currently. So there's small communities of interest, small sharing circles, but that culture has to be, I think, an organic thing that has to develop. And I don't think it's something that we necessarily need the government to force or want to. Because I worked for the government for 19 years. Whenever you have the government forcing people to do stuff, it really it's difficult. So venues like this where we can meet with people and have these discussions and make people want to share, I think are much more conducive towards getting that information out there. In terms of countries that are interesting, I think Singapore is very interesting how they're doing fintech. China's very, very advanced. They basically don't use cash anymore. They're fairly cashless. So I think there's a lot of countries that are doing really interesting things.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And Mathieu, last comment there on that?
Well, I think there is, in terms of a regulation, there is some inspiration that we can take from the GDPR. Definitely, I think it was a good law in terms of protecting the PII of the individual. I think it's been said, but it's conformity does not equal security. It's two different things. You can respect the regulation, and check all the boxes without being secure, and the opposite is also right. It's also feasible. So in that sense, I think we can inspire in terms of cybersecurity and fraud. I would say that the UK, in terms of fintech and how like the financial sector in the UK seems, in my point of view, in advance a little bit compared to Canada.
Absolutely, yeah. And if we have time, we'll maybe touch on that. But maybe we'll switch a little bit. I see there's a lot of people who are here as well from the fintech space, who are fintech themselves. And we've talked about, before in our conversations, we've talked about the challenges fintechs have in terms of securing their own internal cybersecurity. So maybe we'll start off with that and see what are some of the challenges that fintechs face, especially the perceptions that being secure or complying with security is quite expensive, and maybe fintechs aren't necessarily ready or prepared for that financially. So maybe here, Mathieu, we'll start with you as a fintech again. Some of the challenges you see other fintechs have when it comes to their perception of their cybersecurity practices.
Well, we also have the same challenge. Like, we want to work on the kind of collaboration, and like there's a lot of illegal issue and privacy issue that are real, and there are real concerns. We need to address them. But working with large financial institutions, they have all this legal department, privacy department. There's regulation. We need to be sometime like we need to have like really high level of regulation because they are regulated, and we are open to do that. Like I think it's a good idea that SOC 2 and those regulations are in place because there's a need for that. The question is, why would when do I want to be to respect the regulation, because it will cost me more than the actual money I could make from that contract. So there's kind of this idea on like. I do have a little bit of expertise because I'm from that space in cybersecurity, but most of the fintech not necessarily have that expertise. So how we can achieve compliance without costing us like hundreds of thousands of dollars? Like what are the different, again, when I say cybersecurity is a negotiation, it's also a negotiation between the large player and the small player. Establish a plan, say, hey, we will be SOC 2 compliant, or we will be that compliance in that timeline and with your help in that way. And it's really kind of a helping the little one. So if you believe in the opportunity and the product, well, you kind of need as a big player to hold that hand of that fintech and help them through this mangle of different regulation. And you have expertise, you need that. So when I have kind of a cybersecurity as a fintech, when I have a large FI that offer me to review the contract with their legal department or their privacy department, I'm like all in, see all my document. Like for me, it's a free consulting, and I'm using their knowledge to improve myself as well. It's not kind of trying to pass the bar and be okay. It's more like, hey, how can we improve together?
Absolutely. And, we especially if the cadence and what we've seen over the last few years when it comes to working with financial institutions, it's always key for the sector, for the fintechs to be able to work directly with FIs, and for many reasons, consumer access, understanding product development, et cetera. But I think here you're iterating another point as well for their own internal cybersecurity process. Jason, I'm going to go over to you with your perspective.
Sure. I think what Mathieu said is very valid. I also look at it and think, if you're trying to exist in this ecosystem and apply the right level of cybersecurity controls, and you're internally, you have to keep it incredibly simple, especially if you're on the smaller entrepreneurial side, and just make it manageable bites. So I think we'd all talked about this at one other point, but really knowing what it is you're trying to protect and why is key. It's very simple, but it's key. What data flows across your networks? What regulatory or legal obligations do you have based upon your contracts that you either have in place or will have? And once you've figured out what you're trying to protect and why you're trying to protect it, determining what are the likely threats against it. Could it be interruption of those data flows? Could it be third parties trying to get to it because it's valuable? Would you have trouble protecting your entire infrastructure against, say, a ransomware attack? So what are you trying to protect and why, and against, and from what? And once you've determined that, come up with a very baseline set of controls that identifies those things and helps you to prevent any issues. And then the final piece is assume there will be a problem. There will be a cybersecurity issue at some point. You may be hacked, for use of a better term, or there may be some other security-related issue that occurs. Have a way of responding to that internally. Don't necessarily need to hire large companies to be on retainer to be an incident response firm, but have an internal process to keep your business going and making sure the data is safe. And those are the cleanest and crispiest ways that we put forward an approach for internal IT security practices to operate. Now, of course, there are degrees of each one of those. And if you are a large incumbent with 100,000 staff, then it's a very different set of degrees. But we apply this thinking to small entrepreneurial firms, mid-market, and large corporate entities, and it just gets extrapolated out as needed.
Yeah, and it's perfect, and I think very nicely linked with what Matthew's saying, right? Is, for one, if you have understanding that opportunity, I think we all, maybe I won't say all here, I won't give a stat, but I think sometimes when it comes to cybersecurity, our hope is that nothing happens, so we won't prepare. Whereas really what you're saying is, over prepare and hope for the best, right? And that's where, again, like, you can use your resources, Matthew, like you were saying, when you are in partnership with a financial institution, be as transparent as possible so they can help you prepare, because especially here in Canada, they're very hyper prepared when it comes to some of these conversations. And Joseph, from your perspective, with Portage and all the experience you have with fintechs, what are your comments here?
So I guess I'll start with saying that you can spend an infinite amount of money and you're still not 100% secure. So it's always about the trade-off between spending the right amount of money. And when we look, so Portage, we mainly invest in seed, Series A, and then a little bit of Series B companies. So we're there. We're very focused on early stage companies, and their runway is usually somewhere between 12 and 24 months. So getting them to spend a large amount of money for cybersecurity is challenging, and it's maybe not even the best use of their money. So specifically for one of the questions is, what are some of the minimum security measures that investors expect in an early fintech startup? I've actually worked through Portage. We've actually worked and developed a cybersecurity framework, a very basic one that we call the Startup 7. And we basically look at a number of factors that we expect there to be some work on. So might not be complete, but it's done. And just very quickly, I'll just name the domains. And maybe in the future, if you guys will have me back, I'll dive a little bit deeper into this. But the Startup 7 are data handling and privacy, education, cloud security, user authentication, business continuity, endpoint security, and secure development. So obviously those are very broad domains and categories, but essentially what we do with our startups is we make sure that they're making in the right direction, and we don't expect them to be perfect, right? That being said, they always say in startups you want to fail fast, but if you fail, you might be losing a lot of money. So it's one of those really challenging dichotomies of startup culture. It's hard to fail if you're holding, for example, client deposits.
Right, exactly, because the ramifications would just be too high. Perfect. Well, thank you very much. And Joseph, I know with your 7-point plan, and for all of the audience as well, you're going to have a chance to meet with a panelist after the Q&A, so you can always ask them about a lot of these points. I will wrap up the conversational part of the panel. We do have a lot of questions, and I want to make sure the audience gets a chance to go through them. So thank you again very much for sharing your thoughts. I know we have so many other topics that we can get into, so many other conversations that we can get into. But like you said earlier, Joseph, I hope this is the platform where people can start having these conversations and then be able to make the steps going forward. So for the audience, as is already being mentioned to you guys on the chat, please feel free to ask us some questions. I see there's already a long list of questions. So I'm going to start going through them. I apologize if I don't get to your questions. For the panelists, maybe if one or two of you can answer, and then we can keep going because there are quite a number of questions. I'll start the first question with Aman Nabi. His question was, in your opinion, has the increase in security threats during COVID simply been an increase of volume, or has it also been an increase in level of sophistication and complexity? I don't know who would like to take that one.
I can start. I think I can start and then hand it over to you, Joseph, and beyond. I think it's been an increase in opportunity. That's been the primary thing. The change in infrastructure, the change in way in which we all have to work has led to some uncertainties, and then the organized criminals or just the opportunistic threat actors are taking advantage of those changes and all the things that we're going through. So I think predominantly it's been opportunity because we've made so many changes. We could deep dive into different pieces of it, but that'll be my opinion. Joseph, sorry.
So definitely the volume's gone up. So former colleagues at Akamai or Cloudflare, the volume of attacks has definitely increased. But what I would say is that their TTPs haven't changed. They're still using the same, very similar attacks. So I think overall they're just trying more, and it's probably due to the fact that there's not as much. There's just not as much stuff to do because everyone is staying shelter in place.
Mathieu, I see you're going to try and jump in.
I'll jump in, but I may dive a little bit too much into the dark side of speculation. But I'll try to stay factual as much as possible. But that's my opinion. I would say that now we see a volume, and when we will be able to say if there was more sophisticated attack later. I think right now we don't know. Like the sophisticated attacks, by definition, because they are sophisticated, you'll get the end result later on than a few months only. So right now, the timeline could not help us speculate on the level of sophistication of the attack, because I don't think we saw, if there is more sophisticated attack, I don't think we saw the end result yet.
Okay, perfect. Definitely something to not look forward to. I hope that it's not the case, but definitely. So thank you very much, Aman, for your question. I'm going to go on to David Rowley's question. Here, the question is around SIM cards, so phone SIM cards. And the question is, SIM cards are copyable, clonable. This makes a clone SIM card appear to be the real thing to the network run by the cell phone carrier. Thus, SIM cards are a weak point in security terms. Is this so? So do you agree with this? And does this make SIM cards a weak point that cannot be fixed? Or do you believe that there might be a fix? I don't know if anyone... Mathieu, sorry. Oh yeah, go ahead, Joseph.
So SIM jacking, yes, it's a real thing, and it's actually quite common, particularly in Asia, but we have seen it in Canada. So this is where they take over your phone number, and usually they've probably already hacked one of your financial institutions, and they have your credentials, and they use that in order for you them to be able to do large transfers out. So that does happen, certainly. I always push whenever we are rolling out 2FA or MFA at our portfolio companies is for them to use the authenticator apps, which are not perfect, but they're better than using SMS. So I guess the short answer is yes, they are hackable. It's usually in Canada, within our context, it's mostly a social engineering attack where they've actually tricked the telco into migrating the phone over to different card, but then you'll probably see that right away because your personal phone is just going to stop working. So it happens. As to how common it is, it's less common than it is in certain countries in Asia.
Yeah, again, I'll jump in and say, like, I don't think they are the weak point of the cybersecurity. I think the weak point is a password, because as Joseph just said, it's usually a passwords per attack on your telco account, and you reuse the same password that we used before. Like on every website that have been breached, and you did the effort to have a different password. So the bad guy reused the known username and password. So basically it's an email and a password that you use everywhere. They're logged into your telco client account. And then from there, they can either get some information to commit a social engineering attempt, or sometimes they can either have the transfer code straight up to kind of a move. So it's not necessarily an attack on the physical SIM card, the SIM card jacking what we see most into the fraudulent activity. The goal is to get the same number and to get the SMS eventually to bypass those strong authentication or two-factor authentication. Sorry, it's a long day. So that kind of a way to bypass the other cybersecurity measure. But I think a good password hygiene is the solution. Password manager, different password for a different site, a strong password. That's really the key. I think this is more, in my point of view, the weakest link. Again, it's coming back to human as a weakest link, and it's not because they don't want to have strong passwords, just because it's complex to have different passwords and to remember them and have different password everywhere. It's kind of a mess. Either you just have the same format and just increase the number at the end. So in that sense, I think as a cybersecurity expert, you should say, hey, what's your need? What's the requirement? And what is more adapted to you is a password manager, a LastPass or one password, a KeyPass that is free as well. So those kind of a system that will manage your password for you, and you have one long, strong password that you remember, usually kind of either in a sentence with some grammatical conjugation, things like that, that become really, really strong.
Perfect. Since we're on that note, I'm going to jump into another audience member's question. This is from Drew Vincent, and he was, because you did mention it, Mathieu, thoughts on password storages such as LastPass and OnePass. So from what I'm understanding with your answer, you believe that they're, while not perfect, a bit more secure to use.
There's definitely, like, it's cybersecurity. It's never 100% secure, but it's way more than having password 123 as password.
Okay.
So it's again, it's never, you don't have the full-blown cybersecurity solution, but what is the risk level? What's where you need to be to compensate for that risk level? So in cybersecurity, the metaphor that I really like is, imagine that you're being pursued by a bear. The idea is not to be necessarily the first in the front. It's definitely not to be the last one. So that, depending on the risk level and what kind of information you have, and like what is the threat level against you, you need to have an up-par cybersecurity measure IG.
Perfect. Jason, I don't know if you wanted to jump in here.
I think everything for the most part has been said. I would agree, though, that the use of password managers is something that we as a community of cybersecurity people often encourage. But we say that with the caveat, which is those password managers typically require one password to get into unlock all of your list of passwords. I think I have 400 or so in my password manager. If that initial password is very simple, does not require two-factor authentication, is cached in your browser because it's so much easier to have LastPass or any of the other technologies just sitting waiting for you, then you're defeating your own objectives by making it very, very easy for someone to potentially compromise that one password and have access to your life.
But again, to do so, they need to have access on your machine. Aside of the credential stuffing, that they need to have access to the publicly known leaks and the password spray combination. So again, and I totally agree with Jason, you need a 2FA if you do so. What is the threat model against you?
Yeah.
If you're a victim of ransomware and you got your password stolen, better have a really strong password.
Perfect. So I'm going to just make sure for time that we get through a bit more questions, and we're going to move into a little bit more. I'm going to ask a question from Cheryl Tank, and hoping here that all the panelists might be aware of this, but any implications for the Canadian fintech industry from the recent fallout of German's fintech star Wirecard? I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. If not, no worries. Oh, okay, perfect. So serious. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that there was actually ripple effects across across Europe. So that it was much more, the blast radius was much more in terms of the Germans and the areas around that. So we do have investments in Europe, and I know that a lot of the fintechs there, they felt the impact of that within a Canadian and US context. I would say we're probably a little bit more numb to it, but that was a really big one, and it had a very large market cap as well. So there was definitely impacts in terms of the value of that company.
Perfect. All right. So thank you very much, Joseph, for taking that one. I'm going to go on to Godot's question. Any emergent types of threats which worry you, which you see coming in the horizon?
I think from my perspective, the one that's changed recently that has given a lot of our clients concern is actually one of the more traditional ones. It's the evolution of ransomware. Not that the threat itself has changed in too much of a significant way. The payload, the vehicle, the methods, social engineering, just compromises of low-hanging fruit technologies that haven't been correctly implemented remain the same. Mm-hmm. But when we look at what the change of threat, which is traditionally you were asked to pay Bitcoin or a similar cryptocurrency to get a key to allow you to unlock your systems. Now we're seeing, and I think many are as well, that the threat actors are locking the systems using the similar technology. They're also using ransomware as obfuscation for data exfiltration. So they're making you look over here while they're grabbing some things over there. And then they're actually asking you to pay for the key as you would before, and saying, well, if you don't pay, we'll just release it. will release all of the data that we've just taken from you. We're seeing that as more of a trend because I think we got pretty good at combating traditional ransomware, or having processes and technologies in place that meant if you were compromised, if you did have a number of systems that have been encrypted, you didn't have to worry because you had everything on backup. We got much better at that in the last year or so. So they've pivoted, and I'm fairly sure that they're going to pivot again to something else. So right now, that's the one that I have a lot of clients speaking to me about, saying, how do we avoid that?
Mm-hmm. And if I can jump in, it's a really good point, Jason. And if we can jump in, it's somewhat like, imagine that a law firm is being compromised by ransomware. Like, it affects the law firm directly, but they are aware, like they know. But if you're clients of that law firm, it's bring all the third-party issue, like when they kind of usually the group will upload a part of the information, like it goes usually it's multiple steps of negotiation. So they start and say, hey, we want that amount of money, and then they show you and they warn you to expose a bit of your data, and sometimes they do. So you have like multiple part of the dump, and like every 2 or 3 days there's a new part. Having access to those information, it's kind of important as well for other company, because are you in that dump? Like, it's a law firm, it's a accounting firm, it could be a third party. And third party security, I think it's something that will take a lot of importance, and we'll talk a lot in the upcoming years, because you are so dependent on other third party, and they become an entry point to your company.
Absolutely. And Joseph, I'll give you the last word here.
So I think we were talking about emerging threats or new threats, and I would say that one of the things that I believe is going to be more prevalent in the future is whaling. So whaling is the attack where it's spear phishing, but they're actually within a fintech context. They're actually going after senior level C-level executives, and they are perhaps taking over their email or compromising their email and having a look at their business processes. And what they're really targeting there is a big payout, right? So let's say there's been articles written about this, but VCs thought they sent the money to a certain account, and it's not actually that account. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that in terms of the future. In this case, they'll perhaps have a bank account somewhere in Asia, and then they'll take over lookalike domains and so forth. So there's not particularly new attacks, but they are long games, and I see, particularly as fintechs get more popular, we're going to see that type of attack happen. And unfortunately, it really, there's not much you can do about it other than educating people and building up those business processes to make sure before you transfer, let's say, a $3 million fund over to somebody, that it is the actual right account. So that's something to be very aware of. Is as a fintech, probably your most valuable, aside from your intellectual property, most valuable thing is your senior executives and their admins, their emails. So that's really something to keep in mind.
Perfect. Thank you very much. On that note, we're going to wrap up the panel conversation. Jason, Joseph, Mathieu, I cannot thank you enough, not only for your time and your comments, but really providing us with that insight, especially as we said right now, people are starting to become, although they should have before, but become aware of the importance and trying to understand the different elements of cybersecurity. So I want to thank you for spending your Wednesday evening with us here. We did miss a few questions. So for those of you guys who are, we didn't get a chance to go through the questions, I do apologize just for the sake of time. I want to make sure you guys have the opportunity to network, which you'll be able to do as well soon. So you can ask your questions to the panelists there. I do believe there's quite a few people who were asking about the 7 pillars, Joseph. So I saw it on the chat. You already let them know they can email you. So if you are interested in hearing more about the startup 7 domain pillars, please email Joseph. His email is on the chat, and he'll be able to send you that list. For everybody else, thank you again so much for your time and your comments. And I will now welcome Nick back onto the stage.
Awesome. Thank you. What a great panel. That was super interesting. And I think I'm going to be the first to download a password manager from everything I just heard here this evening. Gentlemen, I'll invite you to leave the stage so that I'll be able to share my screen, because we are too many people here right now. Perfect. Thank you. All right, so I'm just going to wrap up before we could move into the next part of the evening. I hope you all enjoyed tonight's presentation. Super interesting. Thanks once again to our panelists and to our co-title sponsors who made this possible. We wanted to let you know that there's another coming up next month on August 19th. We're going to be talking about the digital transformation of FIs. We're calling it the $1 billion overhaul. It won't cost you $1 billion to participate. Once again, sign up and registration is free, and we'll be sending you a link later this evening, if not tomorrow morning, so you could sign up to that event right away. And we hope to see many of you there. So our keynote, or one of the panelists we'll be having is François Couty, who's the Chief Digital and Technology Officer at Fairstone, and we'll be announcing other panelists very soon. So if you're not already, make sure you follow us on LinkedIn or sign up for our newsletter by going to fintechdrinks.com. Great. So now we're moving into the last part of the evening. You'll see on this side, it now says now. We have sessions right about here and networking right about there. There's 3 sessions. These are max 20 people who can participate. One of them is going to be to meet the panelists. So it's going to be in a more intimate setting where you could actually have a conversation with the panelists. There's going to be regulation in cybersecurity and how the CRTA can help you. And lastly, resilience in the crisis, cybersecurity at EY. So we have the CRTA in one room, EY in the other, and the panelists in the first one. So we invite you to move around. We're about 52 people still connected, so everybody should have the chance to move into the different rooms. And you could also check out the networking. I'll be there. Essentially, it's one-on-one meetings. It's max 5 minutes per conversation, and it just randomly introduces you to somebody who's here this evening, so you can share your experience, what you liked, maybe what you didn't like. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Or we hope you all enjoyed tonight's evening, and we could, just get to know each other and meet in the networking. If you want, I'd also invite you guys to, in the event section of the chat on the side, leave your LinkedIn. If you want to connect, if you are looking for anybody to join your team, if you're hiring, the whole point of Fintech Drinks is to be able to meet the community, and we all hope you'll be able to stick around this evening for the next 30 minutes to be able to meet. So that's it on my end. Thank you so much for everybody for coming to our first online edition. Reminder, we'll see you right there in 5 seconds. All right, have a great evening, everyone. Speak very soon.